How you doing, everyone? Welcome back. Well, as you've probably heard, the Department of Defense, or no, excuse me, he decided he needed to rename it from the Department of Defense to the Department of War, which it hasn't been the Department of War since just after World War II, right? It was the Department of War during World War II, and well, up to World War II. And then we changed it to the Department of Defense, where it's been for decades. But no, now we got to call it the Department of War. So it's not about national defense, is it? The peace guy wants to rename the Defense Department the War Department. Again, I mean, give it back the old name, but don't pretend that you're the peace guy if you want to call it the Department of War instead of the Department of Defense. Anyway, that's not where this video is really going. That's not really what this is about, except for the fact that the National Guard is going to be used, and the Department of War has been threatened against the city of Chicago, just like it has already been used against Washington, D.C. And the reason, or the stated reason, is crime is out of control. Okay, you know what? Let's assume that's true. Let's assume for a minute that that's true, right? That those cities have just out of control crime, those two particular cities. Are they the worst? Are they the worst cities as it pertains to crime? Spoiler alert, before I get into the information that I have in front of me, spoiler alert, no, they are not. Why do I say that? Let's take a look at total crime rates, right? Just total crime, all right? This is your violent crimes, your property crimes, every different type of crime, right? 200 cities with 130,000 people or more in the United States. There are 200 cities. Of those cities, you will not believe which one is at the top of the list for crime. You're really not going to believe this once I get into it. All right? Let's start with just total crime. Total crime. The top 10, starting with the worst and working our way down, right? The top 10 overall crime rate. And I picked this up off of Wikipedia, and I've looked at other sources that pretty much verify the information. I will link that Wikipedia page in the comments, or in the video description, excuse me. You can leave comments, hopefully. Anyway, total crime rates. All right. Number 1 is Memphis. Memphis, Tennessee is the absolute worst in the country in terms of crime. Oakland, California. St. Louis, Missouri. Little Rock, Arkansas. Tacoma, Washington. Minneapolis. Portland, Oregon. Kansas City, Missouri. Detroit. Salt Lake City. Yeah, Salt Lake City has more crime than either Chicago or Washington. Salt Lake City, Utah. You know where all the stereotype is that's where all the Mormons are, right? Where does Washington fit in on this list? That we had to make this our number 1 top priority, right? Number 33 in overall crime. 33, which is still not good. But it doesn't even make the top 30. Chicago barely makes the top 50. It barely sneaks into the top 50 at number 48. And yet we're told that Chicago is the most dangerous city in the world. I don't even know how to pronounce the name of the city, but it's in South Africa. hey, wait a minute, don't we know a guy from South Africa that he has a little car company or something? That oh yeah, we're not going to do anything about them though, are we? Right? In fact, we're inviting people from South Africa to come here as refugees while turning away real refugees, right? Let's take a look at just violent crime, shall we? Just violent crime. Number 1, again, is Memphis. Number 2, again, is Oakland. Number 3 is Detroit. Again, number 4 is Little Rock. So, Little Rock, apparently. What are you doing, Arkansas? What are you doing down there? Baltimore comes in at number 5, followed by Cleveland, Kansas City, Milwaukee, St. Louis, and then Dayton, Ohio. That's just violent crime. All right. Where does Washington, D.C. come in? Number 29. So they barely slip into the top 30. Where does Chicago come in? Number 92. Out of 200 cities on this list, Chicago comes in at 92 for violent crime. And you expect me to believe then that there is just this dire need to send the National Guard into Chicago when they're number 92 out of 200 cities? I don't know. Something's not adding up here. Why are you not going into Little Rock or Dayton or Shreveport? Shreveport's a big one. Let's take a look at property crimes, shall we? Oakland and Memphis are reversed. Oakland is number 1, with Memphis being number 2. St. Louis, Tacoma, Portland. Hey, Little Rock makes the list again. Salt Lake City, Minneapolis, Lakewood, Colorado, and Seattle. So, Oakland, Memphis, and Little Rock seem to be the top, the main cities, and St. Louis. Oakland, Memphis, Little Rock, and St. Louis seem to be the big 4 that we need to be concerned with from what I'm seeing here. Where is Washington, D.C. on this list? Number 38. So barely within the top 40. And Chicago is not in the top 40. They're at number 41 for property crime. So still not good. But Memphis, Oakland, St. Louis, Little Rock. Why? Why are we focused on Chicago? Right? Turn the page, shall we? Let's get into more specific violent crimes. More specific violent crimes. Homicide. Homicide. You know what the number one city homicide rate is? I haven't even mentioned this city yet, I don't think. Birmingham, Alabama is number 1 for homicide. Followed by St. Louis, Memphis, Baltimore, Detroit, Cleveland, Dayton, Ohio, Kansas City, Shreveport, Louisiana, and coming in at number 10, Washington, D.C. is at number 10. But, if you want to clean up the murder rate, you got to start in Washington instead of Birmingham and St. Louis and Memphis. I don't know. By the way, Chicago is not even in the top 20, but it's still not good. They're at number 22 for homicide. And keep in mind, this is rates, not raw numbers. Let's take a look at rape, shall we? Rape. I think we can all agree that that's a disgusting, violent crime. What city do you suppose is number one on this list? I know I haven't mentioned this one yet. Anchorage, Alaska. Anchorage, Alaska has the worst rape rate in the entire United States, followed by Salt Lake City, Utah. And then the next three are all in Ohio: Cleveland, Columbus, and Dayton. And then we're back to Little Rock. And then we're back in Ohio again with Akron. That is 4 cities in Ohio out of the top 10 for rape rates. Ohio, what's going on? You know, after that, it's Tulsa, Oklahoma, Springfield, Missouri, and at number 10 is Fargo, North Dakota. Yeah, Fargo. So, where does Chicago fit in on this list? Number 60. Number 60. And Washington, D.C. doesn't even crack the top 100. It comes in at 125. 125 out of 200 cities. Now, when we get into robbery, if we were talking about just robbery, right, I could understand wanting to go to Chicago and Washington. Neither one of them are number one on the list, but they're both in the top 10 on this in the category of robbery, right? It goes Oakland, Baltimore, Washington, Cleveland, Minneapolis, Memphis, Stockton, California, Chicago, Milwaukee, and then Houston. So far, Washington has only been in the top 10 twice. Chicago's only hit the top 10 once. But meanwhile, we have, let's see, St. Louis. Yep, St. Louis, Oakland, Memphis. They are pretty consistent throughout here. And Little Rock. Those 4 cities are consistent throughout everything. Aggravated assault. This is actually one of the most common violent crimes. We have coming in at number 1 is Memphis, followed by Detroit, Little Rock, Kansas City, Oakland, Shreveport, Louisiana, Milwaukee, St. Louis, Cleveland, and once again Birmingham, Alabama makes the list. Washington, D.C. comes in at number 76. So kind of middle of the pack there. And Chicago, number 170. 170. Which means that only 30 on this list of 200, the 200 most populous cities, are worse. Or, I'm sorry, only 30 are better than Chicago in terms of aggravated assault. You are more likely to have an aggravated assault committed against you in my home state Take your pick, Cedar Rapids or Des Moines, Iowa, either one. It is more likely to happen to you in either Cedar Rapids or Des Moines than it is in Chicago. Arson. What's going on, Oregon? Oregon, what are you doing? Oregon hits number 1 and number 2. 1 and 2 are both Oregon. Eugene and Salem, 1-2. Followed by Detroit, Modesto, California. Hey, there's Memphis again. Spokane, Washington, St. Paul, Birmingham, Alabama, Rochester, New York, Cleveland, with Chicago coming in at number 71, and Washington, D.C., number 197. 197. So, arson's certainly not a thing in Washington, apparently. All right. Now let's get into burglary, shall we? Number 1 kind of surprised me a little bit. I mean, I'm not shocked by it, but I was a little bit surprised by it. Seattle. Seattle was number 1 for burglary, followed by Little Rock, Memphis, Cleveland, Dayton, St. Louis, Oakland, Shreveport, Albuquerque, and then Tulsa, Oklahoma. So, again, those big 4 are all on the list. They are all on this list. Larceny. Memphis, Salt Lake City, Oakland. Let me rewind to burglary for a minute because I didn't tell you that Chicago is number 106 and Washington is number 128. So Chicago, middle of the pack, on the lower in the lower half. Washington even farther down the list. Larceny. We have Memphis, Salt Lake City, Oakland, Portland, Oregon, Little Rock, Lakewood, Colorado, Spokane, Tacoma, Washington, St. Louis, Nashville. Those are your top 10 for larceny. And again, these are not necessarily good standings for Washington and Chicago, but they are not nearly the threat as some other cities. Washington comes in at 27 and Chicago at 45. And then motor vehicle theft. I think this is one of the few that Little Rock is actually not on. Oakland, Kansas City, Memphis, Minneapolis, St. Louis, Tacoma, Hayward, California, Dayton, Detroit, Denver. Those are your top 10 for motor vehicle theft. 26 is Chicago, and 36 is Washington. So, again, I'm not saying that Chicago and Washington are crime-free or that they are 100% safe cities, that we don't need to focus on the crime there. We need to focus on crime wherever crime is. Right? I don't care if it's Maquoketa, Iowa, right, which is a town of, I don't know, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 people, I would guess. I don't know how many people are in Maquoketa. But, yeah, Maquoketa, Iowa. I mean, they have... Let me get George out of the way here. He wants to say hi. But yeah, if we went to towns that small, yeah, we would definitely see some shakeups in these rates. In fact, there were some cities that I looked at, some stats that I looked at that had, Jackson, Mississippi, and Biloxi, and some other towns in Mississippi that don't meet the population threshold to have made this list. There are also some other places that that don't meet the population thresholds, in various places throughout the country, primarily in the South. Um, you know, one list I saw had Louisville in, kind of near the top of crime, but that was, I don't know, when I compared it to all the sources that I was finding, and then compared it to this Wikipedia list that I found. I don't know. I don't think Chicago and Washington are the threat that we don't need to be declaring war on American cities. And especially when you're bragging about sending in the Department of War, not the Defense Department even. You actually flat out changed it to the Department of War, and now you're saying that the Department of War is going into our cities. I'll tell you what, Chicago is not far from where I am. Okay? I live in Iowa. Chicago is just a few hours away. If you look behind me, you can see that it's dark outside, right? I could be there before the sun comes up. I could be there before the sun comes up. And, I don't know. What are we going to do? Chicago is not the threat that we're being told it is. It is not the most dangerous city in the world. Actually, the most dangerous cities in the world, even with Memphis being number one on a lot of these and having the worst crime in the United States, Memphis isn't even in the top 10 worldwide. So to say that Chicago is the worst, when for overall crime, where did I say Chicago was for overall crime? 48 in the United States? Not even close. Not even close. But yeah, we have to declare war against our own people, right? I'm glad I'm not. I'm glad I'm not in the Army anymore. I'm glad I got out, because I would not at all, under any circumstances, go along with this. Anyway, I'll see you next time.